Hello and welcome to What the Lux with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. When you think of the soul of a car, you might imagine the roar of the engine or the gleam of the polished chrome. But behind the pulse of Aston Martin lies a quieter force, the hand that sketches the dream before it even touches the road. That hand belongs to Marek Reichman, who is the Chief Creative Officer at Aston Martin and has been for the last 20 years. Born in Sheffield and raised amidst the clang of craftsmanship, his father was a blacksmith, and Marek found beauty not only in power but in the precision and design of a thing. With a first-class honours degree from Teesside and further studies at the Royal College of Art, he went from Rover to BMW to Ford, which at the time owned Aston Martin. Since then, he's breathed life into icons like the DBS, the Vanquish, the ethereal 177, and even James Bond's sleek DB10. For Marek, it's not just about need, as he so succinctly puts it. You don't need an Aston Martin, you desire one. And desire in this world is meticulously sculpted. Marek, welcome. There are so many interesting directions that we could go in, but I want to latch on to Sheffield United and talk about the son of a blacksmith who had a love of design and has managed to have a career that is, its goals, to use a football word. Can you just talk us through what bred your love of design and tell us a bit about your career and then what your responsibilities at Aston Martin are? You've been there a long time.
Yeah, 20 years I've been there. Yeah, I think, that the spirit of why I wanted to become a designer, I was obviously having a father who made things. And I mean, it's a very physical job being a blacksmith. And so I used to see someone coming home tired from work, physically looking drained, but he was a very strong man. And he would tell me about what he'd done. And sometimes on those rare occasions, I would get the opportunity to go and see. And the smithy shop is quite, it's a dangerous environment. And this was, in the 80s where health and safety didn't really exist. And I could go and stand next to a mini blast furnace, which is kicking out some heat with unprotected. And someone would say, "Don't stand there, lad," and I'd be like, "Yeah, of course not, because I'm actually already burning, so I'm not going to stand there, am I?" And I would watch my father make something. So take a raw piece of steel and produce an object from it that I could hold in my hand and it had a use. And I was fascinated. It was a simple thing that I first watched was making big chain links, because that's how chain links used to be made. They were hand beaten, hand formed, locked in place, and the next link was then made on it. And just to see it, I was absolutely amazed. I was like, where's the drawing? So, well, we don't have a drawing for this. It's just from memory. But if you wanted something made from a drawing, we would do this. Who makes the drawing? Well, somebody creates the drawing. And I would like to be the person who makes the drawing, that someone is going to enjoy and take care and have a craft and be considerate about the drawing, because that's exactly what he was doing. It's got to be a little bit tighter, a little bit closer. I want that end to be shaped a little bit different. So I could see this desire for perfection in a way through someone's craft, but it's hard work. So this was a very physical job, but someone in all the heat and the sweat and the energy that's existing, someone had a desire to change a millimeter when all you wanted to do was get out of there because it was so uncomfortably hot. And you're literally using all your energy to create something, but I'll just move it one last millimeter. Just leave it. No. Got to change it. And that's what I then thought. If people have such a desire to make something, I want to have the same passion in creating something that someone will be part of making.
So your love of design was literally forged in a blacksmith's furnace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there was such this energy that existed to make the object. And Sheffield is and was a very, very industrial city, a very industrial town. Its whole energy was based on steel making, was based on the fact that things were made there. And that steel provided, the car industry, the bicycle industry, the motorbike industry. It spread globally in terms of what else you could do from the raw material.
There's something interesting, isn't there, about this sort of contrast of like heavy industry, but then polished design.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of having a part in the sort of the kinetic energy of the whole thing, I could feel the heat of the furnace when you're describing.
Yeah, and I think it's the fact that very, very raw material can go to the extremes of becoming a steel link in a massive chain that supports a huge ship at a port or a harbour that's being wound round one of those big dollies, or an incredibly delicate piece of cutlery that a king or a queen may use. And for me, it was just discovering that this raw material went through that process. And I was fortunate enough to also go to the David Mellor studio up in Hathersage. So you could go in and watch people generating ideas for making cutlery or pepper mills or salt mills, and watch designers create them, and then craftspeople making the objects. And that was fascinating for me as well.
It was interesting, the conversation we were having offline about obviously having a passion for the automotive industry, but almost it being subservient to just a general interest in form and function. And I share that, I obsess over the purchase of a kettle. It took me 6 months. The point is, design is problem solving, and there's something beautiful about figuring out what the problem is and designing a really elegant and beautiful path to achieve a level of function. And I mean, that is something that you must indulge every day.
No, it is. And I think problem solving, you're absolutely right. Design is problem solving. And obviously the aesthetic part of it, generally, the better the aesthetic solution, it's an easier way because of simplicity to solve the problem. And therefore there is a link between problem solving and aesthetics as well, and the purity of the design solution, which gives you almost an aesthetic that tells you what something is used for, because you've solved the problem in a perfect way. And I think that's where that connection between how does it look and how does it work is the magic of design.
Does everything have to provide a level of function? Does the aesthetic have to be linked to function, or can it just be aesthetic? Can it be styling, or does it have to be design?
It's got to be design. I think it has to be design. And actually, when you design it versus style it, it looks better and has longevity. That's when you get the timeless, because it's the right proportion, it's the right reason, it's the right thickness, it's the right length. All of those proportional answers fit within what your mind is reading as perfect proportion, golden rule, however you want to describe it, has longevity, because you'll always look at it and say, actually, it's really good. But it's down to the millimeter. And when it doesn't work, it annoys you. It's like the tiniest things, when you open the bottle of milk and there is a paper tab on the top and there's a little tab to pull it off. When it's too short, it comes off in your hand or half rips. And you get so frustrated. And it only needs to be a millimeter longer for you to get a better grip and you pull it off correctly.
I actually lose sleep over things like this.
Likewise.
So that leads me to a question that I wasn't really expecting to ask. But if all design has to be linked to function, and if it isn't, it's styling, what do you think is going to happen in an era of electrification where the dynamics of a car, which are linked to combustion, sort of aren't?
Well, I think it's a really brilliant inflection point. I mean, we're past the inflection point, actually. We're in the discovery mode of what is the potential of electrification right now. And I think, for certain brands that exist in certain segments, then electrification the consumer is not quite ready, because they still have this desire for the mechanical, for the visceral, for the feeling. Not that you can't have that with electrification, but it's more I wear an analog watch, but I also have digital devices. They both have different uses, but if I'm going to an event, I'm more likely to wear an analog than my digital device, which does everything more accurately, tells me everything I need to know, Oh, you've had a call. Great. I must call them. This just tells me the time. But it's great because it's a piece of jewelry that its function with an aesthetic, and its aesthetic has gone beyond its function.
Do you ever find yourself annoyed by the digitization of things to remove the utility from things that are also beautiful?
As a designer, never annoyed because technology and advancement are so vitally important for us all and the planet, etc., etc. But what always happens is there is a reaction against once we automate or we digitize. So we can have perfect MP3 music and now actually uncompressed, but record sales, vinyl sales have gone through the roof. I can have all of the books that I want on an electronic reading device, or in fact on my phone. However, magazines, book sales are greater than ever, because as soon as we say to human, this does it better, we always go, well, actually, I like the creased page in my book, and I like the fact that I can flick back and forth on the magazine, and I can look at this page and that page and make a reference. It's really hard to do on a device. So as soon as we digitize, make it easier, again, with probably the exception of washing, because who wants to go to the river and bash their shirts against a rock? Of course not, because that's a task that we want to eliminate. But those other tasks are joyful tasks. So I don't want to eliminate them. I want to enjoy them in a wider scope of capability, from MP3 to listening to amazing vinyl. And going back to the electrification in automotive, I actually think for the creatives, the designers, the engineers, the people building the cars, again, it's another bookend, another capability. It's building something that's slightly different and giving the consumer a slightly different experience. But I also think that the beauty of proportion, or the beauty of a different proportion versus what we would recognize as a classical form, is greater in opportunity because of electrification, because I'm not myself, the designer, will not be constrained, therefore, by the size of an engine. You know, as the technology of battery and motors increases, as with everything, we downsize. You know, at the end of the day, this my device is now a global information system. It's a supercomputer, and it fits in my pocket. Right now, we're decades in. When we get to half a century into electrification, etc., the technology will have changed and be almost unrecognizable. So it's about enhancing the capability that something has. And if you then said, well, if it's micro-sized in all its componentry, I can make it look like a piece of sculpture, because I'm not constrained by the narrative of something else. So I think it's a huge, massive opportunity for creatives when we look at the future direction. However, then saying, if I want a tourbillon, if I want something like this, it has to have a certain size, and I'll enjoy that as well, because my digital device and my analog watch are completely different in their proportion, but I know why, and I'm attracted to each in its own way.
Has car making become less technically complex as a result, firstly, of electrification? And of course, there are things around that as well, sort of automated design and, all sorts of things like this. But how much easier is it to enter the car industry? What do you imagine the future of the industry will look like? And I suspect that there's a different answer there on the mid-market and at the upper end. But
yeah, I think there are differences, as you mentioned, in terms of market positioning and the price value equation. But from a technology standpoint, it's actually getting more complicated, more technology based. They're not simpler. The advent of 3D printing for manufacture, which means you can adaptive change something. You're able to engineer and design a beautiful object through the analysis of the forces that are needed. So I think actually technology is improving to give us these very, very different aesthetics, almost an organic form, which looks more like nature versus something which is mechanical and made, because the forces that are required And guess what? Nature's been doing it for billions of
Well,
years.
have you ever followed
Often it's this-
Nuri Oxman and
Yeah,
the MOT
exactly.
Design Lab? You know, I mean, this stuff's fascinating.
Yeah, and her work is wonderful and groundbreaking in terms of showing to the rest of the design, the creative community, what is possible when you combine the technology and the form of art and the utility and the use pattern of something as well.
Will you contextualize, actually, for those who don't know Nuri Oxman's work, and then maybe we can further that by talking about materiality and changes in materiality?
Yeah, it really, looking at the advances and the capabilities of materials, looking at computer generation to generate form and shape through those materials. So you imagine, rather than saying I want a vessel to hold, rather than saying I want a drinking glass, I say I want a vessel to hold water that is made from material X. And then I apply the capabilities of that material, and I could get some incredible shapes and forms because the material that's being created is not one that we know.
Yeah, and she's also biologically growing, you know, sort of materials that are, you know, sort of as strong as steel.
Yes.
And, you know, it's sort of really fascinating, you know, in this world that's plastic ridden.
Yeah, and I think exactly. And that technology obviously is being applied at the high end, first of all. So in the, let's call it ultra luxury space, because that's where there is a high investment in terms of the piece price of the object, because you're selling those objects, those cars, those watches at a very, very high premium. Therefore, you can invest more in the technology. And right now, the technology doesn't spread across the mass market, but eventually it does, in the same way that, you know, cathode ray tubes don't exist any longer in televisions. But when flat screens first came out, they were incredibly expensive. Now you wouldn't see the alternative.
How has the material science changed in your specific field since you started your career? Has it changed a lot, or is there something in luxury that'll always be quite sort of elemental?
And it's material science has changed a lot from a construction perspective, and again, using technology to achieve certain forms. So obviously the advent of more and more and more carbon fibers, and therefore the competition grows within the raw material manufacturer. So whatever carbon fiber can do, aluminium wants to do. So aluminium becomes lighter, stronger, more pressable, etc., etc. Steel even tries to compete then as well. And then you get the brilliant hybrids, which are a hybrid of, say, aluminiums and carbons, or steels working with carbons, or different alloys, titaniums working with carbons, etc. So it becomes a material race, because everyone is wanting to produce the material that everybody uses. Then an aesthetic arrives, because the consumer sees carbon and says, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, what does it do? Well, it's lighter in weight, it's stronger, and it looks like this. Whoa, yeah. And then if everyone is using it, so from the tennis player to the golfer to the Formula One driver is using carbon fiber, as a fan, as someone wanting to purchase, I go, well, I want carbon fiber too. I want a carbon fiber tennis racket. And then there's the next. So, you know, someone will say, well, we can generate the perfect form for you using a different material, better than carbon. Some people will move to it, and others will say, well, no, I like the carbon. So materials have changed a lot from what you would imagine, steels, aluminiums, into carbon, and now a great mixture of aluminium and carbon. And whatever comes next is how those forms are generated, and how you can actually deposit metals, and how you can use carbons and form shapes that are perfect in their structure and have this amazing kind of almost insect-like form and language to them. So materials has really changed how we can develop and create cars. And once you have more capability within the structure and the material, it allows greater freedom in other spaces, because, you know, a vehicle is about mass. So if I can reduce the mass, then I can have more of something else.
You've been witness to an industry. There've been a lot of roll-ups. There've been acquisition. There are cars. They're brands that your average consumer wouldn't expect to be part of wider portfolios that are part of other brands. In some ways, it always feels like Aston Martin sort of stood like a little bit apart from the automotive industry. That's my perception anyway.
No, I would actually, yeah, I would say yes. I think it's what I would describe as a love brand, and so I think that it's a love brand because the reaction to the product is generally very positive, and it's a love brand because it means something to many people. There's a sense of being, going back to who are we, what do we stand for, and why. Having associations with great characters in movies helps, and it's one of the longest standing associations on the planet, 60 years last year, in terms of how many years we've been associated with James Bond. And all of those things help, because 60 years is a long time to be associated.
I was trying to not ask it, but what's it like designing a Bond car? Do you get to do all the gadgets?
Some of the gadgets, but it's an amazing opportunity. I think, yeah, if there was a cherry on top of the cake, on top of the trifle, on top of everything, that's it. It really is. It's a magical. You're part of the entertainment world at that point. And my career is to create cars that are very, very serious, highly capable cars that can perform above 200 miles an hour in some instances, and are just literally about performance. And you go from that to designing something for a movie, which is just about entertainment. But part of the messaging is about being true to the brand. So there's only been one car specifically designed for James Bond, and that was DB10. I was insistent that it's not a prop. It has to look like a real and authentic car. It must look as though you or I could purchase the car. And that was part of it. And when...
But hang on, so DB9 was production, and
DB9 was production.
DB10 wasn't.
So DBS was the first in the recent putting Bond back in Casino Royale, and DB10 Inspector was the first and only car so far to be designed specifically for James Bond. So Q did his work, basically.
And the 177 has always kind of fascinated me. What's the...
Yeah, 177 was, again, one of those pivotal moments of where materiality were really important as technology was changing. We use, still today, bonded aluminium structures. So very much like the latest technology of aircraft, it's an aluminium extrusion with cast nodes and machined nodes, so the connecting parts, if you like, and they're bonded with a high-tech material that effectively is stronger than a weld, in the same way that aircraft were built. But slowly, those nodes, which were cast in aluminium or other alloys, were being replaced by carbons, and the extrusions as well being replaced, just as the plane industry is as well now. So the aero industry is bonding carbons. So 177 was at that change point, and it was the first time we'd a carbon fiber tub, and tub is chassis for me, the connector, the bits that you hang everything on, the gearbox, the drivetrain, the engine, was now sitting in a carbon fiber chassis, whereas we'd only done bonded aluminiums before. So really important technology shift for us. And going back to that every millimeter matters, I was insistent that we don't have a B surface. Now, what's a B surface? A B surface is effectively the bit that you don't see. So when you open the door, that is a B surface. I care less about it than I do the A surface, which is visually in front of you. But my insistence here was that everything was a B surface. So when you open the door, the apertures were beautiful. So it was complete holistic design. And then just to put the passion and history into the car, because it was so advanced in its carbon fiber technology, we decided to do an aluminium body. So the flip of what you would expect, where we would normally have an aluminium chassis and a carbon body, we did a hand-shaped aluminium body to sit over this technology. And when you see the 177, there are very, very few what I would call shut lines, so making lines, part lines. The whole of the rear is one piece, and the whole of the front, apart from the hood, the bonnet, is all one piece. So you can't see the connection of parts. Even down to the door is a single piece of aluminium into the arm that holds the mirror. And again, it was one of those this is impossible to make moments. In carbon, easy. In aluminium, incredibly difficult, because we had to draw the aluminium out of the door skin, and talk to Ross Lovegrove about making aluminium legs out of tables.
The most beautiful parts of design are the things you can't see.
Yeah.
Marek, who's your favourite child?
Child out of my family.
Family, whatever you consider your family to be.
I only have one child.
Whether it's inanimate or animate.
Yeah. It's so difficult to pick one. I'm lucky in family that I only have one, but in cars, it's so hard. It really is so hard, because actually after 20 years, it's so hard because of the changes in technology that have led to each product. So I normally get away with that answer by saying by decade, 177 and Valkyrie.
Okay, fine. What about some of the other things you've designed? The Routemaster, for example.
Yeah, I mean, amazing opportunity. First saw the advert that Boris Johnson was holding a competition when he was Mayor of London to design the Routemaster bus. So Norman Foster sent me the advert and said, what do you think? And I thought, well, isn't this for, students, et cetera, And we met and said, you know what, we should put our brains to this, because it's an icon of this country, this capital city, and is really, really important. And if we were to win, then obviously the second prize would be the true winner, because we're professionals and we don't need to do that. But the exercise was incredible. The research was incredible that we did. The final chosen design, which is the one that you see running around today, was really an ethos as close as we could get it to the original piece of design, which again was remarkable because it was based on the technology of aircraft design in terms of holes and sections and how they're applied, how quickly and easy it was to change motors, etc., etc. So we wanted to apply architecture and design in its best form and knowledge, and Routemaster was a brilliant journey, an amazing thing to see. I mean, I've had such opportunities, from Routemasters to apartments in Miami to singular homes in the US and Japan, to bicycles, to clothing collaborations.
The bicycle thing's interesting because the founder of Aston Martin was a really enthusiastic bicyclist,
That's
wasn't
right.
he?
Yeah. So Bamford and Martin basically started the company, and the reason we are Aston Martin was because Lionel Martin's wife said, you guys are crazy to call yourself Bamford and Martin when you race up Aston Hill and there is the telephone arriving and it will have a directory. And if you call yourselves Aston Martin, you'll be first in the directory. That is the very reason. And she was also the one that set up the pit stop. So we won many early endurance races because we were so organized in a pit stop, whereas everyone else just had chaos. They were arriving and nobody knew what to change or how to do. And she said, no, you're going to do front left, front right. She
was quite involved.
She was very, very involved.
Can you just bring these characters to life a bit? When you're sitting there talking about the archives and what the sensibilities of those founders were and how they would see the world today.
Yeah, so they were pioneers. So if you imagine they set up and signed the company deeds in 1913, which means we were at the very forefront of communication, of speed, of flight, of breaking barriers. And they were fascinated, by speed. They were fascinated and well-traveled, incredibly well-traveled, fascinated by discovery and fascinated by this new thing that was happening, the automobile. And in 1913, we just started to move past the cars that kind of looked like horse-drawn carriages without the horses. And we were starting to get into more speed forms and shapes and lightweight and pushing the boundaries. How could we go past 100 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour? How could we get to 200 miles an hour? So they were pioneers who were absolutely fascinated with the discovery of change. Very, very well traveled people, as mentioned. The first moniker of the brand was an A and an M together. Really beautiful, as you would imagine it from the early 1900s as a script. They traveled to Egypt as Tutankhamun's tomb was being unveiled, and around the tomb were lots of images of scarab beetles with wings, and they came back and said, you know what, it's very much about winged flight, movement, travel, etc. And they changed the brand from having just an A and an M to a winged brand as we would have it today, and that is a scarab beetle wing.
And it's a piece of jewellery, isn't it? It's made in the jewellery district.
Yeah, it is.
It's really interesting what you say about cars looking like the carriage without the horse. We're kind of in that situation now, aren't we?
We are, yeah.
I would imagine the car industry the automotive industry will slightly reorganize itself. And what is a car supposed to achieve, and what can it offer those who are trying to get from A to B, but perhaps have what other purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is A to B, and then there is desire. So in the world of Aston Martin, nobody needs an Aston Martin. Everyone who wants an Aston Martin needs it through desire. So it is heart over head. Your heart, that desire, is controlling your emotion to say you must have it. A to B is very different. That's what's the most efficient, what's the cleanest, what's the easiest, how can I do it with the least effort, and is it repeatable constantly, because I just want to go from A to B. So I want reliability. But then I want choice, color, material, brand, etc. How is that service supported? Almost like we have a phone provider choice, or we go Android or Apple. So where is my choice? So what is choice at that level? And the more you think about travel in the future with autonomy and the fact that these units, pods, can talk to each other, no need for a driver, no need for windows maybe. What else can I do in the car? Is it my 20-minute sleep nap time as I commute? What else am I able to do? Can I just send the car off to pick up the groceries without me? I don't need to go any longer because I can map the object to go get something. The other end of the scale, at Aston Martin's end of the scale and our competitors, it's very much desire in the future. So it's tech-based desire. Another example, going back to the horse not being at the front of the carriage any longer. If you think back to the turn of the century, the early 1900s, so the turn of the 19th century, early 1900s, horses were so relevant. In London, the streets would have been full of horses, cabs, milk deliveries, grocery deliveries, hardware deliveries, all being driven by terrible smells. Everything was the horse. Today, you don't see a horse, apart from sometimes if you go to Hyde Park, you see these amazing horses with the horse guards riding them around, and everybody stops to look, and they're fascinated by them. And everyone's fascinated by the horse as leisure, going to watch jumping, racing, ownership, etc. It's become pleasure and leisure versus utility and need. And I think
it's a luxury.
It's a luxury. And I think that is exactly what will happen with movement, transportation. And the car it's a very, generic name now, because what is a car in the future?
Yeah, exactly.
What is car in the future? And I think it's so different, because as soon as you can levitate and you can maglev and you don't have wheels, am I in a car? Is a car personal transportation, or is that a transport system and therefore it's not a car? Because right now with the advent of AI, etc., autonomy in cars and self-driving is only limited by legislation. It's not limited by technology.
Do all of you sort of design sort of legendary people like Norman Foster and Johnny Ive, and do you all sort of go for a pint and think about what you're going to sort of design next?
Well, I wish we could, but sadly we're all a little bit too busy. So it's brilliant when you get to reconnect with people. I recently had a message from Ross Lovegrove, who I've again loved his work for many, many, many years, and through a mutual friend, he said, "Oh, Russ says hello," and we went and had a meeting and had lunch. But it's so rare, because we all travel a lot. We're very busy. You end up with more work, not less work, and that becomes a sad moment. And sometimes there are conventions, or there are meetings, or there are events that happen, but they tend to be so fast or quick that you don't really have the time to have a good conversation.
What was it like collaborating on these branded residences, Miami? How did you export your DNA into a new context? Yeah. And what are the risks associated with putting yourself in something that's going to live on, a community that's going to live on, that's got your name above the door? And I can't help when I think of this thing, it's like, you'll never see a Mini broken down the side of the road because it's bad for the brand. It's a heavy responsibility, that this community that you put your name to. So how do you deal with that?
All of the above, in terms of the decision go, no go, were thought about a lot from myself, just in terms of, should we be doing this as a brand? Is it right for the brand? This is a 62-story building in Biscayne Bay, highly visible and it's changed the skyline of Miami. So you've changed the skyline of Miami. Every plane that's coming in sees that building. Well, if you get it wrong, that's a big scar on the landscape. But if you get it right, it's a monument forever, as it were. So a lot of soul searching in terms of, should we make the decision? Should we do this? Is it right for the brand? And that then comes down to the partner, the developer, and their desires and their passion. And from my perspective, it's got to be that old adage that 1 and 1 have to make 3, that the combination of everything is perfect. It works for the brand, it protects the brand as well. But it was also innovative. And since then, we've seen other non kind of developers put their names, whether that's automotive or fashion houses or styling houses, put their names to residences or hotels, etc., etc. And so in a way, we were, just like the founding fathers of the brand, paving a new path, doing something different for the brand, to use it as a symbol, as it were, as a tool to expand into new customers, new markets, new experiences. And ultimately, that's what we sell. We sell not just the car, but the experience of owning the car as well. And that's vital for us. So when I was approached by G&G, the development family, I met the whole family. They are Argentinian as a base, independently wealthy, very successful in what they do. And every question I asked, they answered in a very, very positive way that I felt supported the brand. And then I asked them again in a different way, and they were still positive. And then I said no. And they came back and said, we really want to do this. We will do X, Y, and Z. And I said, okay, these guys are passionate about our brand, protecting it, and want something together. And that was a 10-year project, effectively. Yeah, from the first signing to completion last year in May was 10 years. And it's a big project to take on.
Will you do more?
I think yes, but they have to be right people, right place, right opportunity, and it needs to be a little bit innovative in terms of how we would do it in the future, having done one, because it should always be about innovating within that space as well, and how we deliver on that.
As a sort of design purist and audiophile, someone who, I feel also appreciates or finds important the design of a kettle or a toaster, what are the great British brands that you have in your house?
Great British brands. Well, if I start with fashion, so I'm a big fan of Burberry. I think what Daniel Lee is doing right now is unbelievable in terms of shaping and changing a brand that was again very, very dedicated to one specific thing, object. And Burberry stood for one thing, and over time, Burberry has changed and changed and changed. But what Daniel has now done is explode the brand from really what we know as Burberry to something completely different. But it's still Burberry at the core. It's still very British. It's about the craft. It's about material. the combination of both the subtlety, but also the expression. So that would be one. I'm also a big fan. I'll stay on fashion, but slightly more relevant to ourselves. I'll go to Oswald Boateng, recently on one of the Vogue magazine covers with Ice Up Rocky. I think he does incredible suits, incredible materials, not expected, unusual within the context of Savile Row. And therefore, you're taking a craft, a skill, which has a name, it's Savile Row tailoring, but applying different material to it, unexpected materials, colors, combinations. So maintaining the DNA of the street, the row, but applying his own language to it. What else do I have? Of course, my kitchen is full of Sheffield steel knives.
Are you a cook?
I am a cook. I do enjoy cooking. It's my form of relaxation. Actually, I know a lot of people get home and they say, "Oh, just order something." That's my worst nightmare. I have to cook. I enjoy it. It decompresses me. I love being adventurous with food. Favorite cuisine would be Japanese. Favorite food would be Italian. And then if I put Indian cuisine somewhere in that trio, it would be they would be my heavenly go-tos.
Who's your amplifier made by?
My amplifier is a Lin. So I have Lin system, which is the other British Scottish brand, actually Lin. And I've recently had my system reconfigured. And, now the amps are about 10 years old, but I've had some new additions to the family.
Well, there's a whole interesting analog digital thing going on with amps as well, right?
And,
like valve-driven amps.
I think that the sound quality is unbelievable. And I am an audiophile, and sometimes I've positioned the system so I can sit in a chair and do that moment where you feel like the speakers are in your ears. And it feels like the artists are in the room if I close my eyes.
It's a beautiful image. It's a lovely thing to just sit in a chair and have exceptional speakers play beautiful music through a valve amp.
And the great thing now is that obviously previously I was getting the best quality of sound, obviously from CDs or putting the vinyl on, but now through the uncompressed music, actually through the apps that I have, I can play decompressed MP3 music, so I don't even have to get up to change anything. You can just get a constant flow of music.
You must get involved in all of these nuances, from upholstery to sort of sound quality and internal acoustics when you're designing these cars. I mean, it must be a great joy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that materiality, again, earlier on, we talked about the move in materiality within ultra luxury and the luxury space as we move to higher tech materials, but you still have the traditional materials of leather for instance. And leather is a fantastic material because it is, if you treat it has character over time. It has longevity. Of course, if you mistreat the leather over time, then you will destroy it because it's an organic material. But if you apply the right coatings time after time after time, like a brilliant pair of shoes, you can wear them out, but you can always repair them. And there's something beautiful about this natural material and maintaining that natural material and the sensation it gives you back from touching, feeling it. Not so much wood any longer in our cars, but all wood is the same in terms of its texture, its changes, it's organic, it moves, and it's absorbing and expressing the moisture in the air all the time.
Do you think the car industry is turning its interior cabin into like a mobile phone instead of one large mobile phone, instead of doubling down on like the beauty of a dial or the craftsmanship of a switch and the tactile feedback that even whatever boring companies like Newell Rubbermaid spent thousands of prototypes figuring out how the feel of a thing was, and I feel like we're losing that.
I think that the consumer is being driven to assume that multiple screens and technology and information is what's required. And
it dates cars as well.
It does absolutely date cars. And that software, imagine trying to run a car in the future, like having a 4-generation ago phone and its iOS operating system. It just doesn't get supported. So there is always a drive for technology. but sometimes there's a drive to detox from technology as well. And when you mention analog or dials, they are wonderful things, and you can combine technology and using technology and analog together. And I think to make a difference in the future, having this perfect combination of the information that's needed that supports the technology that you have to have, the information technology you need, which is a legal requirement, but also the enjoyment of, if you're just sitting there in a traffic jam and your engine has gone into off mode because you have stop start and you can hear a clock ticking. That for me is a wonderful sensation. Or on startup, I can actually hear a needle move. There's something beautiful about it, and I'm not getting noise then. I'm getting sounds that really, again, make me connect with the object.
Exactly. Like, my life currently is sort of littered with children, or feels littered with children, but, it just feels they're two sanctuaries, and one is the bathroom and the other would be the cabin of a sports car, and it's sort of the fact that there's a sort of large screen just stuck onto the front showing me my calendar feels a little bit unholy.
Yeah. And if you're using your car as your leisure luxury experience, and it's about performance and therefore it's a sports car, you don't need that, do you? Because I don't need to be aware. And actually the tiny little device on your wrist can tell you you've got a meeting in 2 minutes, and it can buzz, and it can send an audible message to the car because of technology. It doesn't need to appear on the screen. You don't have time to look at it anyway. What would be, for me, far nicer is to have those mechanical elements that show you everything that's happening, that tell you you're really, really in tune with the object and the driving and the sensation of it. But for those pods, again, those moving things of the future, it may be what you want, because you can stare at your calendar, rearrange your calendar, do all the work you need to in the car. So I think that side of it, it's the crossover point. What am I using my car for? And if I'm being driven, i.e. I'm in the back, then you probably want to surround yourself in technology or screens. But if I'm driving, it should be about driving and what supports you as a driver.
I always feel that, a thin screen that shows that it is sort of digitally enabled and shows you perhaps what's playing in an arrow, for which I suppose is true of this sort of...
But we have, again, we mentioned Bond earlier on. We've got a great ambassador where we can have gadgets and tricks in the car that deploy and disappear. And, for me, that's very much what our future will be about. It's about having the entertainment and the technology when we need it. So I'm entertained by the visceral, the connected things. But if I need technology, it appears, just as Bond would make something magically appear, and then it disappears when I don't need it.
If you could change one thing about your industry, what would you change?
It would definitely be some of the legislative pressures and pushes that we have that actually in some instances don't allow for the innovation that we need in the industry. And I think we are far too governed by legislative change constantly, rather than a long-term view or vision that says, okay, we have this as a point, let's work towards it, rather than constant changes, because you have to develop and you have to develop to that change. So if we have longer term vision and strategic view, it's easier to make change and develop for the future. But right now it's too much piecemeal, too much, and regionally as well, different legislation in each region around the world, rather than everyone getting together and saying, yeah, hold on a minute, this is best, let's do it this way.
What's the thing that sort of excites you the most about the next 5 years?
Winning a Formula One race, winning Le Mans. I think that just...
Accidentally telling us about all the things that are confidential.
Just the fact that we are in such a change moment, and we're at that point where the acceleration of change is really going to happen through different hybrid systems, and the decision to go, is it just one solution or is it several solutions? Because I think we've seen that actually it will be a multiple of solutions, and that the industry is realizing that visceral objects are really important to consumers. I mean, we have just created two cars, Valor and Valiant, which are V12 manuals, and they're wonderful objects. And one of our Formula One drivers has one and constantly raves about it. And that's someone who is driving one of the most high-tech machines on the planet for a job, yet their enjoyment is a manual V12 Valiant.
Do you think of yourself as a luxury brand?
Yes, ultra luxury. I think we had to coin ultra luxury because luxury has become overused a little.
It's like mid-market. It's like a search term.
Yeah, because everyone wants to get to that point, but what does it mean? Is it the value equation? Is it a rarity equation? Is it wow equation? And I think you have to move yourself away. A cup of coffee, a brilliant cappuccino is a luxury, but it's not a luxury by the milk or the coffee bean. It's the service that gives you the coffee. And yes, of course, you can have an amazing roast and you can have the best milk or not milk, if you like, but it's the service that it's delivered to you with and how the brand around that is presented to you is luxury.
Yeah, I mean, a provocation to all of the clients we work with is to remove the product and ask them searching questions about the before and after and the ecosystem. And, what if you're a subscription? What if you're a service, not a product? I find that quite interesting. It always yields some pretty interesting thoughts. What is the US luxury customer like compared to what markets do you sell in? How does it vary?
So we sell, the dominant markets would be US, Europe, and we separated UK from Europe, but if you put them together, they would be slightly bigger than the US. Asia Pacific, then China, and what I would call rest of the world is kind of how it would flow in priority as well. So the US is a big market for us. It's a critical market. It is a big market itself. The US consumer is, they are both traditional and non-traditional at the same time. There is more of a desire for change, but then sometimes I wish it was like it used to be is kind of the reaction. But it's as a culture, it's a very fast moving, evolving, changing culture as well. And so it's really, really important to stay ahead of it, to keep up with the trends that are happening, to look at the macroeconomics and the change environment that's there as well. We've just recently, last year, opened Q by Aston Martin in New York on 57th and Park, which is effectively a small piece of the factory, the home base in America, in one of the most influential areas in New York. And that's really important to meet the future consumer, to see the consumer of today, to see traveling consumers, because it's New York. And I think what you always have to look at in America, particularly LA and New York, is there's a transient population of wealth traveling through there as well. So those destinations, those places, it might not be an American consumer that we're looking to talk to. It will be someone who's passing through there. And the same would be here in London. We'll open in Berkeley Square, another Q center, because this is it's a travel destination also. And so it's important that your brand stays relevant to the culture and the consumer that's there, but you don't design for that consumer. You're selling a British product and brand that stands for something into that community.
I mean, never has the Henry Ford expression felt more relevant. Don't design faster horses. What's the thing that you fear about the world that we're leaving the next generation?
Yeah, I think the lack of care for the human beings that are actually on it, and not giving those generations things to build, things to do. And I think that's a big fear that I have, which comes through the digitized world, because I think as human beings, we love to make things and do things. And I think my fear is that we will stop. We stop investing in the arts. We stop investing in creativity. We stop, we talk about STEM. There's no A in STEM. I wish it was STEAM, that art was in there, because I think that is really important factor. And that's my fear, that we leave people with nothing to build, do, or make.
How do you use AI in your design process on that theme?
Yeah, it's really important. And AI, because you can't ignore technology and you can't ignore AI. You can't, be a Luddite and say, oh, it's rubbish. I'm not. You have to enhance it and say it's brilliant. And as soon as you accept that it's brilliant, then use it for what it's brilliant at, which is collating imagery from the past, ideas from the past, because that's all it can do, even though that past may be 1 second ago, because it's so fast, but it is what exists, and it's generating something that doesn't exist. So the great thing about being a creative is I also have a mind that is seeing things that don't exist. So I can compare my vision of the future to what AI is predicting as a vision of the future as well. And if I don't compare it, how do I know that I'm right? So it's like anything. If you do your research, if you do your analysis, and I think design is fundamentally about researching the past as well. How do you know you haven't repeated something that was done by someone else? Yeah, you've got to do the research, and AI just helps you with all that research. It's so immediate. And then I can focus on future things and different things. So use it to find a very quick state of what is today and what could be tomorrow, i.e. 24 hours, because it can't do 24 years into the future. And then think about the predicted state from my own creative mind and my team.
Artistry will always be a representation of emotion, but design, to our earlier point, is sort of solving a challenge. I do think there's a difference between creativity and design. And, I guess, for me, the question is, given a large enough data set, all of human history, or most of it, can you predict the future, and design solutions for problems that are upcoming?
Yeah, I don't think you can predict a future, but you can't predict the future. So you can, you can have pathways. It may be A, B, C, D, and they're different pathways in the future, but at least you have 4 choices, or maybe even multiples of, and one of them may be a predicted future. But then you don't have the resource to do them all. So you've got to kind of decide what you believe in and what you think, and what, if you're working for a brand, what the brand is and what it wants to be, and how the trends and the changes in time will attract the consumer in the future, and therefore what is the future of the consumer. So I think that's vitally important in terms of how do we look and predict and what do we see. And in many ways, you can use AI to kind of look at one of those pathways and say, well, what if we did this and all these things happen? But as we've seen in recent years, things change the way we interact overnight. COVID is a perfect example of just a complete change, and the unpredictability of change is what's fascinating about the future. And for me as a designer, imagining a future that is completely unthought of is where I have to go. And I still don't understand why we have road systems and networks and we travel to places. Why don't the places travel to us? I've always wondered that. Why isn't it in the reverse? Or why aren't we living like nomads and moving? Why do we specifically want our home to be in this certain spot? Why? I always ask why. Why is the system we have so constrained? And of course it's constrained by the links that we have, but we drove ourselves, excuse the pun, down a certain pathway. If we wouldn't have thought it that way and we were, nomadic, then it would be very different, wouldn't it?
This is a very pedestrian version of that, but I always wonder why we don't travel for menus rather than going to restaurants and then being served infinite choice, Yes. Why don't we just travel for especially in cities? I just want to end, Marek, by asking you if you are a good driver.
I guess everyone would say, you'd have to ask someone else. Yeah, I'm a good driver. Yeah.
You were driven into the automotive industry through a love of design and the relationship between design and the manufacturing of a thing. Was that sort of accidental?
No, I mean, I mentioned my father again as the blacksmith. He was a car fan, a car nut, and his closest friend was a mechanic. My brother, who's older by 7 years, was a car nut because of those two as well. And naturally, I became, the youngster in the pack who was also fascinated by cars and just the sensation of movement. My dad was an amazing driver as well, and was interested in going as fast as he possibly could make the machine he was driving go. And I enjoyed that. My entire youth was spent in the back of a car encouraging him to go faster. And I think because of that sensation, I've raced amateur cars or amateur racer for maybe 35 years. So I'm okay. And I've beaten a few people and lost to a few people, but I'm not bad.
On that reassuring note, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Lux. You can find us on socials at Matter of Form, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLux. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterofform.com and chat to one of our consultants.